Inspirational Creatives, episode 285. Welcome to Inspirational Creatives. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. Join me every Friday as I chat with successful artists, producers, and creative entrepreneurs who share powerful stories and strategies. They can help you to create the life that you want. Listen each week as these inspirational creatives show you how to take your creativity to the next level. You'll learn how to create a sustainable business that inspires others and gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. Thanks for listening. Make sure you sign up at inspirationalcreatives.com to get free exclusive bonus material. And now, on with the show. Rob here, and welcome to another episode of Inspirational Creatives. And today is a very special episode for me. So we're live in conversation from the JMS Studios here in the heart of Norfolk in Hethersett. And I've got with me somebody who's been a great inspiration to me over the last couple of years in business and in life, as a mentor, as a coach and as a guide, helping me to get my ideas into action in a strategic way. He's the founder of the Business Growth Club, which is here on my doorstep in Norfolk, England. And I'm delighted to introduce you to him today, Neil Foley. Neil, welcome.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Robbie. You make me sound like a priest then for a minute in terms of mentor and looking after you spiritually and business-wise. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate, yeah. No, I've enjoyed our journey over the last couple of years, and you've definitely helped me to navigate my own journey, because sometimes I think we get so wrapped up in all the ideas and the experiences that we're having. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see the wood for the trees, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm grateful for that. I'll announce that early on. But for our listener today, they obviously perhaps don't know you and would like to get to know you. How do you see yourself in the world today in terms of what you do and why you do it?
Blimey, that's a good question, isn't it? The Business Growth Club was, I think, founded in my head out of a desire and a real deep-seated need in me to actually help other people. And it's very much aimed at micro and small business owners because they're the sector that's a little bit unloved. They don't have a lot of money. They often have an idea or a germ of an idea, but don't quite know how to navigate that into the real world. And there is only one advantage to getting old. There's lots of disadvantages, but the one advantage of getting old is you know stuff. You've experienced it, you've fallen over, made the mistakes. And I think there was a desire in me to think, actually, what can I do with this knowledge? Not all of it's entirely relevant for everybody, but you're just thinking, actually, you know what, why don't I try and share this and find a way of doing that? And hence the Business Growth Club was really born from that sort of initial thought and idea, and then developed over the last few years. And then I guess as I get older, I'll start to forget stuff. But at the moment, I'm still remembering stuff. So I'm in quite a good place at the moment.
Yeah. And you've got a podcast too. So we're actually capturing the conversations that you're having and your ideas at the same time, which I will hopefully be set in stone forever.
Well, you introduced me to the podcast and the whole concept of podcast, and been an enormous help with me technically and also in terms of strategically, what should I be doing with them? Haven't always followed your advice, of course. But so, yeah, I've probably recorded about 100 now, so I'm nowhere near your level, but I just love them. I mean, they're just a great way of having conversations with people, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. You're certainly catching up. I enjoy your podcast, and I'm not just saying that. I really do enjoy your podcast. But let's talk about that for a moment. I mean, how that podcast journey has worked out for you. What do you think some of the surprises have been for you in terms of, I know there are lots of people out there that are thinking about starting a podcast, and obviously there's loads of benefits which you can read about why to start a podcast. But for you, what's the reality of having a podcast like been for you? Has it promised what you've been looking for?
It has, in terms of, I think, reputationally helps. You meet very interesting people. You tend to have what I would say quite in-depth conversations with people. I don't edit. I do them very raw. I don't tend to use a studio. I do occasionally and come to JMS when I need the really high quality, but otherwise I tend to do them in cafes, restaurants, public places, outside. I like that informality side of it. I think I've got to know people better. because they're not one-sided conversations, but they're pretty close, aren't they? Because you're just prompting and asking questions and follow-up questions. So I think I think I've thoroughly enjoyed them. How you monetize them, I think, is a different thing altogether, and I'm not interested in that. I just want to spread the word. Is that a good enough answer?
Yeah, it's a great answer. Actually, the monetization one's a fascinating thing to me. I mean, it occurred to me actually just the other day about this, because I don't get it asked as much as I used to, which is, how do you monetize a podcast? But more recently, I've been thinking, well, why monetize it anyway? Why do you want to monetize it? That's might be a stronger question, because that often leads to a deeper conversation about why are we doing this anyway, and what do we want to do a podcast for, or what's the podcast for in that sense. But what I heard there, which I found fascinating actually, is it sounds like a bit of an icebreaker, and I've seen this too with other people, where actually having a podcast is a great way to have a conversation with somebody you might not normally have the opportunity to have a conversation with, but you might think they're interesting. Has that been your experience?
Without a doubt. So I've done podcasts with people I know quite well, but actually the most fascinating ones are where people you don't know. And I think if I said to them, look, I'd like to shoot a video, I think people will, stick a camera in front of them, and most of us go to pieces and struggle. Just have a conversation and maintain eye contact with either a mic somewhere, unobtrusive. People just rabbit. And people are always fascinating. I mean, I suppose that's the human condition, isn't it? People are really fascinating. And if you think you've found somebody who isn't fascinating, that means you just haven't asked the right questions, because they will be. There'll be a story in there somewhere. And because you're not monetizing it and you're just genuinely trying to find out more about them, actually it means the conversation can go any direction it wants. It doesn't have to have a focus. You can have a theme, but of course if you then end up going sideways, who cares? It doesn't really matter. Because I think from a business viewpoint, none of us have got anything unique. So you can find anything you want on Google or Bing or wherever. The reality is we're looking to connect most of the time, and we, in particular in small businesses, the only way you compete with the big businesses is the human touch. And so if a podcast helps somebody get their personality out there, then from a business viewpoint, that's job done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think of it. So it's not just really about, sharing knowledge and marketing from that point of view. This is all about developing relationships in that sense.
Yes, it is. And as you know, I do podcasts on different themes, not just on from a business angle. The only thing I suppose I'm cautious with sometimes is I don't like people doing self-promotion. There is a line, isn't there, when people are saying, well, I do this and I do that. And I prefer it to be more them talking about the sector or the particular role that they fulfill, rather than because it's not an advert. But they should be sharing expertise in terms of their general experience, rather than you should use me. And I have had a few people approach me and say, I want to do a podcast because I want this, that and the other, or I need some self-promotion and the rest. And I don't do them. And I just say, no, I'm not. To be honest, I'm not interested in that. If you're coming on this just for self-promotion, actually do it yourself or find somebody else, because it isn't me.
Yeah, I too have had guests reach out to me, or potential guests, I should say, because they haven't become guests, reach out to me, and you can tell it's just simply... In fact, I had a bit of an embarrassing situation recently where a previous guest reached out to me saying, hey, I really enjoy your podcast and listening to your podcast, and I think I'd be a great fit for your show. And I'm like, you've already been on the show. And this is clearly one of these happy, accidents. And what really fascinated me is one of the bullet points in the email was... he could talk about authentic marketing, and I thought, well, this is clearly written by a VA or somebody who's just simply, looking for podcasters on LinkedIn or what have you, and just bashing it out.
And there is a lot of those around now, aren't there? They all seem to be American. Yeah. So I get invites almost every week or every day, probably, from somebody saying, XYZ would be a great guest on your show, and normally I don't bother replying, but every now and then I do and say, the product's an American product and I'm in Britain, so can you just tell me where the synergy is? Yeah. And normally it goes quiet then. But there obviously is a bit of an industry out there, isn't there, trying to, get people onto different podcast series.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because I'm intrigued as to what your views on this, because this isn't a conversation we've really had in terms of that aspect of self-promotion, because in my feeling is, in my opinion, I think that just having a podcast is enough actually to raise visibility for yourself and what you do in the world. The best podcasts, in my opinion, are where somebody has a genuine passion or interest in a subject, or they care about a community of people and they want to solve the problems for that community. And here's a podcast that are conversations about all of that. And that's all you need to do, really, because I think the inquiries will start pouring in from the right people anyway. But what I wanted to ask you and sort of learn from you with all of your experience is, in this day and age of hyperconnectivity and social media and all the rest of it, do you think marketing, or maybe marketing's not the right word, but this business of self-promotion, how have you seen that changed in your experience? And what do you see not working today for micro business owners? And what do you see working in terms of finding the right customers? Because I know how important, it's all well and good finding customers, but finding the right customers.
Yeah, that's the crucial bit, isn't it? I guess we're all a bit jaded with social media. I certainly am.
I am.
And certainly had enough of it. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday saying, actually, it's about time I just deleted Twitter, because why do I do Twitter? It's just noise and abuse and everything else. So I think, as you know, one of the great books I love is the They Ask You Answer with Marcus Sheridan, which is an extraordinary book in terms of essentially saying that none of us own IP. We haven't got information that nobody else knows. You can find anything you like in terms of out on the net if you could dig enough. The big problem is you don't know who to trust. And that's true with very big corporations to small companies. Who can you trust? Because everything's self-promotion, everything's saying I'm great, etc., etc. And we see that increasingly with reviews, reviews on Amazon, which are really important, crucial. But a lot of them, do you trust them? Are they right? The same with TripAdvisor. Are they, is it somebody who's got a grudge? Is somebody, you get your family to post the reviews. So who do you trust? And for me, marketing is more now about awareness and trying to say, look, I've got some expertise. I know what I'm doing. Let me give you some information. Let me show you how valuable I am. And the more you do that, the more, one, people will be going onto your website or looking at your social media or your posts. But secondly, you're becoming the go-to person. And that's essential. I mean, that's what the They Ask You Answer book was all about, is become the go-to person. Don't hold anything back. Give people information, because they can find it anyway. And what you'll do in most cases is people think, okay, I can understand it, but actually I want you to do it, or let's have a conversation. So I think, in my experience, marketing now is far more about giving knowledge away and information and being the expert in your niche, as you said, the right client, rather than trying to talk to everybody. Because if you talk to everybody, that'll never work. Yeah. Never did, but it certainly doesn't work now. And we're all getting a bit jaundiced and a bit jaded. And self-promotion is nauseating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I detest it. And you see it increasingly on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a fantastic tool used well, but some of the stuff is just nauseating on there, and I don't buy any of that. Maybe it works for them, which is fine, but it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure it really works.
No, I don't think it does. I think that for people who haven't read it, I would say They Ask You Answer, because I think there's over 1 million books on Amazon with the word business in their title.
Wow.
And if you look at the number that's published in the last 30 days that are available on Amazon in the last 30 days, it'll be in the hundreds of thousands. It's just absurd. And you can keep reading books forever and keep, or listening to audio books or whatever. But the reality is, at some point or other, you've got to get off your backside and do something. And I would say They Ask You Answer is one of the 5 books that you need. You don't need to keep reading hundreds of books. You just do something once you know the knowledge. And They Ask You Answer is all about giving information.
Great. What is it about that book that you particularly like, though, in terms of what would you say your biggest takeaway from that book has been?
The transparency on price was the big one for me. He's selling swimming pools in the States during the financial crisis when the world's falling apart, in particular real estate, as they would call it in the States.
Yeah.
And with selling the pools, a classic salesman's line is, when somebody says, what's it cost? To say, well, I don't really know. I need to come and see you and pat the dog and say what a lovely house you've got and have a cup of tea and do the schmoozing bit. And that's classically what he used to do. But he suddenly realised people want, why not just tell them the price? And you can't give an exact price, but you can give a range. And what you're doing is pre-qualifying people. So those who think, actually, I can't afford this, or it's more than I want to spend, then they're not there. But what you're doing is showing you've got nothing to hide. So you're just saying, actually, this is a very transparent process. Because most people, when they engage in sales, and most of us don't like sales, the worry is, am I being conned? And it's like when somebody asks your budget and they say, well, I'm going to budget at 10 grand. Lo and behold, somebody's going to say, you know what, I can do it for 9,950. And you think, wow, who would have thought? Yeah. So there's that cynicism around it. So I think that was the big takeaway for me, was the total transparency. Just be upfront. Say this is what it costs. The costs range and vary according to, in his case, it was topography, features, distance, access and stuff like that. But otherwise, this is what it costs. So it costs from here to here. And I love that bit. And you do see that more now. And to the extent that if you're on sites and there is no pricing, it's deeply frustrating. You suddenly think, how can there not be a price? There is a price. Why do I need to engage to find a price? Give me a guide. So I think there is a move more towards that transparency side. And that was the big takeaway for me on the book.
Yeah, pricing's an interesting one. Often comes up, actually, in a lot of conversations. Yeah, I mean, even though I spend a lot of my time coaching individuals in terms of their career and starting podcasts, curiously, the pricing bit almost inevitably comes up at some stage in that person's journey in terms of what it is that they're offering. And even when they're not looking to me for guidance or advice in terms of that directly, I'm often sought for opinion, and it's interesting just experiencing other people playing with pricing in that sense. From a micro business point of view, and from all the businesses that you work with, is it a universal challenge, pricing?
Absolutely. Most people don't understand it. Yeah. I'm not saying I do. I think it is incredibly complicated.
A bit of an art and a science, is it?
I think it's. If you study economics and management, and the rest of it, they would say there's more science to it. I'm not convinced of that. I think if you're making widgets, it's potentially easier because you can see the production process and work out what it costs to produce a widget and then scale it, etc. If you're in the service sector, it's much harder. It's what the market will bear, what the market will wear. There is a lot of psychology on pricing. If you're cheap, people will assume you're cheap for a reason. But then that makes it quite tricky. I think often people have a crisis of confidence. A lot of the businesses that I've worked with when doing some of the coaching with them, in most cases they've increased prices substantially and it's made no difference to their customers whatsoever. Customers in a lot of cases don't even bat an eyelid. It depends where you are and what sector you're in. Of course, whether you're B2B or B2C, but pricing is very tricky. People don't, there isn't an easy answer on pricing. It's the same way as valuing a business. Yeah. There's books and huge articles written on valuing a business. Yeah. Ultimately, it's what somebody's prepared to pay. Yeah. But, there's loads of different ways you can go about it. And it's the same with pricing. But largely, people are probably too cheap. And largely, in most cases, should probably put prices up. Yeah. Because you can afford to be less busy then and earn the same money. Yeah. We have this exercise. We've done this exercise. I don't know if you were in the room then. If you had assumed you had a gross margin of 30% on your product, which is a very low margin, but assume you had 30%, and you're under pressure to discount because of competition or because somebody's asked you for a discount or you feel you should or whatever, if you discount by only 10%, which is a pretty low discount, you have to sell 50% more to stand still.
Amazing.
And you just think, wow, why? So 50% busier, 50% more chance of things going wrong or stock or hours you've got to do. And conversely, you can do it the other way around and increase your prices by 10% and actually you can afford to do 25% less and stand still. And that for most people is a more attractive option when you think most people are run ragged and haven't got time. That's the big factor I find when you're talking to people. So I haven't got enough time. I'm juggling so many balls and spinning so many plates. Well, actually, put your prices up, be less busy and earn the same money.
Yeah. Have you actively used that strategy with clients and with people that I know are in the Business Growth Club? And have you seen definitely. Success with that strategy?
Time and time again. Yeah. It's the confidence to put the price up. It's always a dilemma, though, and I understand that, and it takes a leap of faith. But every client that I've coached who's done that has made significant progress because it doesn't put clients off. Clients will assume that you know what you're doing. If something's cheap, people will assume it's cheap for a reason. The only dilemma I always have with it is the Business Growth Club is incredibly cheap because I wanted it to be very accessible to micro and small business owners who I know in most cases haven't got spare funds. So from a pure business viewpoint, if I wanted to be more mercenary about it, I should put the prices up significantly. But I don't, for a very reason that I run the Growth Club to a large extent as a social enterprise. Mm-hmm. It hasn't got the label, but the labels doesn't matter. The reality is nobody ever gets turned away because they haven't got any money. If they've got a problem, then I'll help. But I think in every case I've seen where people have put prices up substantially, they've just earned more money.
Yeah, right.
Which gives them the freedom to recruit more staff or move or invest in equipment or services, etc. So it's a real win-win.
Yeah, fascinating. You mentioned a leap of faith there and having the confidence to put your price up. What do you feel or what do you think is behind that in terms of that lack of confidence? You work very closely with a lot of people. Are there any themes or threads that you see there in terms of, is this a self-worth thing or is this what is it? Is it imposter syndrome or something like that that's going on?
It's probably a mixture of all that, isn't
it?
I mean, imposter syndrome's everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're all going to have that at different times. It's probably worrying a bit too much about the competition.
Okay.
Because none of us are doing anything unique. I was talking to somebody the other day who's a member of the Growth Club and very, very good at what he does. He mentioned there's over 50 videographers, which is his skill set, just in our city. And so it's very easy to get yourself in this mindset that, the competition's massive and therefore price is really important. And actually that's not the case. The reality is if people are using a videographer, they're going to try and work out who's the best videographer for them if they're going, if it's a wedding they want or if it's a business or, So you're looking then for the expertise that they've got and the experience, which is where the podcasts come in because you demonstrate expertise like that. So I think there is self-worth, there's imposter syndrome, worrying too much about the competition. And ultimately, it feels a risk, doesn't it, to say. And actually, I suppose the caveat you have to add is you need to be good.
Yeah.
Actually, if you're okay and you're average and a little bit shoddy and the rest of it, then actually putting your prices up might be suicide.
Yeah.
But if you're delivering a good service to the best of your ability,
yeah,
actually just have some confidence. But I appreciate that's not easy.
Yeah. I want to ask you about service there because you mentioned it, and I'd love to ask you a couple of questions around that. But before I do, on the competition theme there, what's your attitude towards competition and how to deal with it? For somebody starting out, I mean, because I could absolutely, and I know it's a blocker for many, because they're like, well, how could I offer anything different to what they can offer? Or, what they're offering is so good, I don't know if I can compete with that. I don't know if it's even worth me starting a business in that field.
Good question. I think, again, if you're talking product and making a product, which most of the time you won't be, but products is difficult. If it's a simple product in particular, if it's a widget, then you might as well get the widget as cheap as possible as long as the delivery's okay and the quality's okay and the pricing is okay. If you're thinking service, the trouble is with service is we end up with these sort of terms, if you like. So if you say, for argument's sake, you want to be an accountant or you're thinking in accountancy, that there's so many different forms of accountants. It's not just somebody who does your books. There's management accountants, there's forensic accountants, there's people who will give you tax advice, there's people who will specialise in tax advice because tax is huge and incredibly complex here in the UK. So there's niche, and niche is the name of the game. I think if you're going to think, have I got the confidence, and is this right, and is there a market for it? You can do a degree of market research, but I think niche is the answer. Know your particular speciality and really narrow it down. And I wouldn't worry about the competition because the reality is like this fella that I was talking about with the videographer. So there's 50 in Norwich, but they'll all be doing slightly different things. They'll all have slightly different skill sets. They'll all have stuff that they enjoy. Some will be photographers as well, and videography is just a bit of a part-time thing. And I wouldn't worry about the competition. There's enough room. There's enough business out there for all of us, really. As long as you're realistic and you're not going to shoot the lights out. I know some people would say you need to have your back to the wall before you can really, so put yourself under enormous pressure. Actually, I think that's a very dangerous strategy. I know it works for some people, but it isn't something I would advocate. I think you would be far more cautious and dip your toe in. And often with a service-type business, you can do it part-time. Dip your toe in, try it.
Yeah.
You don't have to work 30. I mean, I probably work 60 hours a week because I love what I do, and why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And they could be the same. So if you've got a day job, that's great. Well, all the barriers have gone, haven't they? All the barriers have gone because of technology. If you want to write, write. If you want to film. You want to do a podcast, well, what's stopping you? You can do it sufficiently on your phone if you wanted to. You don't actually need any gear. Just start talking. Find something interesting to talk about. So with all the barriers gone, what's to stop you just dipping your toe in? But find a niche is the real one for me.
Yeah, that sounds like great advice. And I know you're I say a fan, but you're a follower of Seth Godin.
Yeah, I love Seth.
Yeah, and I remember, in fact, I think this might have been his wisdom that you passed on to me. It was about being a big fish in a very small pond.
Yeah. That's one of his recent blogs he's talked about, is finding the pond that's big enough to be viable rather than trying to be a big noise. And you do see people saying, I want to compete with Uber and we're going to be this unicorn. Do you think, what a load of nonsense? Just find Seth's, I mean, he's a genius, isn't he? Seth's the one to say, find the minimum viable number and become a big fish in that small pond and then see what happens from there. There is this great focus on unicorns and I don't quite understand. I understand it in terms because it's about money. But we have such a mindset over here, which, again, I find a bit odd. People always talk about exit. I've got to come up with an exit route. And I know lots of business books will talk about that. But exit route sounds a bit like to me that you've got it's pass the parcel. And I just want to pass it to somebody so that I'm not holding it when the music stops. And a lot of the UK businesses we've got that have gotten into trouble are all about exit. It's just about let's make it look as valuable as possible before we pass it on and take and I think that's just bizarre. Why don't you build a legacy? Why don't you build a business that's got the stand, a chance of lasting 50 years rather than I just need to use technology and be a unicorn and then pass it on? I don't get that.
Yeah, no, I can see your point there, absolutely. And it's an interesting one to me, that business of thinking about exit. I often wonder, and I'd be interested to know your view on this, if you're thinking about exit from the beginning, is your heart really in it? That's kind of part of the question. I think
the initial concept with exit was saying, well, it's not all about you. Because if it's all about you, you've got nothing to sell. So that's the initial bit. It's trying to think, well, I need a management team in place. I need the E-myth, if you like, in terms of that concept of having roles, which absolutely makes perfect sense.
Yeah, right.
But it seems to have morphed from that to thinking, but how do I make money? And if it's all just about money, then I think that's sad.
Yeah.
And I did do a very interesting podcast with a lady we both know who's half Swiss and half Welsh. Great combination. And the Swiss mentality is, indeed a lot of the Europeans' mentality is, no, I'm building a business for my children and for their children. So it's that longevity, which doesn't seem to be something that we think of in the UK, or certainly people talk about in the US. It's more there about, no, I need to exit in 5 or 10 years and for as much money as I possibly can. And I think that's sad.
Yeah. I think things are changing. I mean, I'm optimistic by nature.
Yep.
But what I'm starting to see in terms of the buying choices of younger generations, they need to be convinced that who they're buying from cares about what it is that they do.
Yep.
I'm seeing that more and more, and I think to some degree we're starting to see the beginning of the end for some of the larger corporations where they can't just tick a box and demonstrate that they care. Sorry, what I mean by that is ticking a box as a means of demonstrating that they care. Yeah. They've actually got to be doing it.
Yeah, I see that more and more. The corporate social responsibility side tends to be at the bottom of the website alongside the modern anti-slavery policy, which says we don't employ slaves and we do this, that and the other. And most of the time the CSR is Mickey Mouse. They don't actually mean it. It's a tick in the box. And I would hope you're right, that I think people are saying, no, I've got a choice as to who I deal with here, and I want to deal with somebody that's environmentally responsible, somebody who does treat people and their staff well. And if businesses are smart, they can use it for a competitive advantage. We've seen that in our neck of the woods with Aviva, the colossal insurance company, an international giant. actually going out of its way to say we need to look after people, we need to look after employees, we need to look after their mental health and everything else. And you would hope that there'd be more people doing that. And I'm a very strong advocate of saying actually corporate social responsibility should be at the core of what you do. Be that, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has got that most people have never heard of, but actually are a phenomenal set of rules to live your life and your business-wise. And you'd hope that people will make more choices to say it isn't just about money. And that's often where the small businesses can help, because people will support small businesses. People like small businesses. They don't like the giants. We all use Amazon because it's convenient and it's the way of getting stuff. But given the choice, we'd use the small guy. I see that in Norwich we've got most people aren't going to be in Norwich who listen to this, but Norwich has got a very small hardware store called Thorns, which is a really like a throwback to something like 50 years ago, isn't it? And I was in there this morning because you go in there to buy stuff, and the place is always busy. And people are buying stuff, super glue, nails, whatever it is. They've got a lot of them, and people support them because they like them.
Yeah. Yeah, there is something about these independent businesses and the artisan businesses these days, and I love that. And I think what it is there's a uniqueness about it, and I think people like to identify with that uniqueness, perhaps in a world that's growing in population in that sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So with all of that in mind, then Neil, for somebody that's starting out today, and maybe I'm hoping what you're saying is resonating with them. What could they be thinking about? And actually, there's something they're really passionate about. They'd like to make a living from doing something in that space, but they haven't quite yet found a model that fits or an opportunity as to where they could start in terms of business. What sort of mindset would you apply to that very early situation in terms of what to be looking for? How do you know, in your experience, to put it another way, how do you know in your experience where you think you've got a good business opportunity here? How do you test that? What's the next step?
That's a good question, isn't it? If I had the answer to that, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here, Ron. That's unfair. But I think for me it's being realistic, because sometimes people come to me and they'll talk about an app that they want to develop, and they need 6 figures to develop the app, and where are they going to get the money from? And you think actually you're delusional, because apps are that I think all the stats would say people don't use, they don't download apps anything like as much as they used to, and if you start paying for it, then actually the numbers dwindle. So for me, it's being self-financing is probably important. When people come to me and say, is there any free money around? You say, actually, there never has been free money. And it doesn't, historically it doesn't grow on trees. So if you're looking for free money, then forget it. And why should somebody else give you free money to sponsor your idea? The whole mindset is wrong. So start small. Develop your product or your service or your offering. See what the competition's doing in terms of, so you can see what you think they do well, but actually what they do poorly, more to the point. And with all the barriers gone, just have a go. But maybe do it part-time. Maybe, do it as long as it doesn't conflict if you're employed, so with your employer and you're not breaching any of your employment contracts, then actually just have a go. But don't do it on borrowed money. Don't do it with grants. There are some grants around, which makes sense later on, but they're relatively small grants most of the time. Don't assume you're going to earn a fortune, because you won't early on. People talk about overnight success. It doesn't exist. There's companies that sometimes get accused of it, and then you look behind the scenes and think that actually they've been grafting for 8 years or 10 years. And now finally they've got it together and broken into the bigger markets, but nothing happens overnight. So be realistic, really.
Yeah. Be realistic.
Is that a reasonable answer?
I think that's a brilliant answer. And I wish I had been given that advice way before I'd met you, Neil, because I think that would have helped me. I think that where you've helped me as a coach and a mentor is actually trying to figure out which of these ideas are realistic. And I don't think that is a problem you can solve on your own.
No.
You have to trust somebody that with their experience and knowledge and say, look, here are some ideas I've got. Which one's the most realistic, or which opportunity is the best next step for me? And sometimes, and again, this is something you've taught me, sometimes that's a little bit counterintuitive at first, just because of the nature of business and the way that business works.
And actually, It's an interesting mindset because it can be painful. Because if you've thought about something and you've got expertise and you've got these ideas and you're formulating stuff and you share it and somebody says, "No, that's not going to work," or there's a problem with it, actually that's really deflating and very difficult. And I saw this in my own experience with an idea that we had, developed it, got really excited by it, which you do, put it out there, and actually what happened is other people were going to make a judgment call on it. So put it out there and the judgment call is they didn't like it. And actually that's really annoying and really deflating and causes you the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt and all the rest of it. And so the strange thing is, psychologically, I think there's a bit of you saying, actually, I don't want their feedback. Actually, this is because once I get their feedback, once I share it with you and you say, "Neil, best will in the world, mate, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, Z," actually my dream is gone. And it's a bit like having a lottery ticket and then not checking the numbers because, the draw's gone, but you're buying the lottery ticket, even though you know statistically you've got almost no chance of winning. You're buying the lottery ticket for the hope. And that's true with a lot of people in their business as well, that there's the hope. But actually, once I check the numbers, then the dream's gone. And once I get the feedback, then actually my dream's gone and I've got to back in reality.
Fascinating, yeah.
Whereas actually the smart thing to do is to get the feedback very early on. The feedback may not be accurate, but that's where you get multiple feedback and you go and test and you push and you challenge. That's what you should be doing. But feedback is essential, I think.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Great advice there. Thank you, Neil.
Pleasure.
You mentioned there's no such thing as free money, but what I do know is you give a lot of great guidance and wisdom away for free on the businessgrowthclub.net.
Yep, certainly do.
Could you tell us a little bit about what people can find there?
Yeah. What I've done is create 19 modules on the Growth Club, which is a mixture of video and workbooks. And essentially broken down what I see as some of the not necessarily 19 independent things, but 19 things that businesses should do if they're looking to grow, in particular micro, small businesses. The important bit, the video is a little bit of me talking, but most of it's animation, and it's trying to explain the concept to say so that people understand it. Then the workbook is actually saying, okay, now you understand a bit more about it, let's explore it in a bit more depth. But then posing a number of what I would call searching questions of them, saying, well, now you know this, what are you going to do with it? When are you going to do it? How's this going to impact on you? So they're classic open questions and trying to get people to focus to say, well, now you know that, for instance, the importance of a headline in marketing to grab people's attention. What are you going to do? So there's 19 modules. They're all free. They're released 4 a month. They probably... The docs are sent to you via using Google Docs. They go in a shared folder so that I can see when people are working on them and the rest. They're probably the sort of thing that you could work piecemeal through. You don't have to sit down and do it in one hit. You can, I think from what I find that people have done them, people learn a huge amount from them. It challenges them, and they don't always like the challenge, but it challenges them. And it just gives people a structure. And rather than being busy fools, which we're all guilty of doing at different times, actually just focus a little bit. They talk about working on the business rather than in the business. It's one of those sort of horrible cliches, but there's an element of truth to it to say sometimes just look a bit externally and say just focus on these bits. So the modules are all there. All people have to do is, just leave an email address and they're emailed to them. I don't use the email for marketing. I don't do any of that. I'm not interested in that. So, yeah, they're a great resource, and also a lot of podcasts there. And the podcasts tend to be for local business people who've got a story to tell, not about necessarily them per se, but about their sector. So I uploaded one yesterday, for instance, which is about the role of a mediator in a legal dispute, something I didn't know anything about. And Mark, who's a lawyer, talks about what the mediation process is and how it works and the good bits and the bits that are a bit awkward. And that's what the podcasts are all about. So there's a ton of information on there.
Brilliant. That's great, Neil. And actually, one of my favourite modules is the 8 Business Boosters.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, head on over to the businessgrowthclub.net and, go and have a look at my favourite module first. And as you say, have a little look around and see what Neil's got on offer there for you. Neil, I've just got a few closing questions, if I may. These are questions I like to ask, if I remember them.
Okay.
Ask a lot of my guests when I have a good chat with them. One of the questions I would love to ask you is, what's inspired you in the last week?
I did a podcast. It has to be podcast themed.
Okay, then. Yeah, sounds good.
I did a podcast with a lady yesterday who is looking after her husband who has vascular dementia. And she's also looking after a mother who's got Alzheimer's, but her mother's in a home whereas hubby isn't. And I think I find those conversations inspiring because these are normal people like you and I in extraordinary circumstances and coping and crying and struggling, but coping. And it's very grounding because it makes you think, you know, what is important in life? It isn't money. You need money to food on the table and everything else, otherwise you're a burden to other people, but you need food on the table. It isn't about stuff where, we're just before Christmas and we're all going to be buying so much crap that, none of us really want. Certainly none of us need it. Mm-hmm. It's about relationships and love and support and the rest of it. So I find things like that deeply inspiring, and I've done a number of these now. And every one makes you it just grounds you enormously, and the resilience of the human spirit is extraordinary. So I find those very inspirational.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah. What are you grateful for today, with all of that in mind?
I'm above ground. I'm grateful for the friendships that I have around. I know a lot of people, and I'm known, I think, for being quite a generous soul, so I like all that sort of stuff. I enjoy life. I really do, and I'm of an age where you could be thinking of retirement, be thinking, why would I do that? I'm enjoying what I'm doing. There's a number of different threads and ideas we've got, and seeing people grow and develop and stuff is great. So, no, life's good.
That's great. And finally, what's next for you?
Yeah, I was looking at that for next year because we're in December 19 in terms of what am I going to do next year. There's 4 or 5 different business projects which are on the go. Some in the health sector and some not. I think for me it will be concentrating on those 5 and getting those 5 off the ground because they're all in collaboration with other people. They're not me working on my own. In most cases, I make the tea and just get chivvy them along a bit. So I think if we could get those 5 off the ground and have another year as good as I have this year, then actually we'll have made a difference, which is what all of us should be doing, thinking about anyway, is making a difference in one way or another. And if I get to the end of next year and those 5 are still motoring and starting to make a bit of impact, that'd be fantastic.
That's great. Well, you've made a huge difference to my
thank you, Rob.
Life and business. Thank you, Neil. And I'm very grateful to have you on the show today, and very grateful to the folks at JMS for allowing us to record in their wonderful facility here in the heart of Norfolk. Thank you so much, Neil.
Yeah, pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks very much, Rob.
Thanks for listening. Nothing beats the stories and advice of an expert to help you raise your creative game. I would love to know what you thought about today's episode, so don't forget to subscribe in iTunes, where you can rate and review the show. If you like this episode, I invite you to share it on Facebook or Twitter with the one person you know who will benefit from the wisdom shared here today. You can find the show notes on inspirationalcreatives.com/podcast. If you have a burning question or a great idea for a guest, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com/contact, where you can connect with me there.